This has been a really hard video to edit because it's a lot easier, I think, to waffle on when you're talking about something you've experienced. So it's taken a really long time to edit it, and I've ended up having to add little bits in and just put on this same top so that I'm not constantly wearing different clothes through the video. Sometimes the quality is not very good. I think it's something to do with this phone, and I probably need a new one because I only record on my phone. But sometimes it's good and sometimes it's really not such good quality, but at least it's only for a short time usually when it's like that. Hello! When I put out part 1 of this series on Monday, I noticed that some of the comments were suggesting I wasn't safe, that I was in physical danger, and so I pinned a comment to the top explaining that I wasn't, and it really concerned me that people thought this, because I really didn't want to send a message that if you're in physical danger you should stand up to a narcissist. That's not what I believe. And it's so important that your safety comes first. So I wasn't sure why people had that impression, so I listened to the video again, and now I get it, because at the end of the video I'm saying that I was surrounded by fragile glass and there are all these men outside. So I shouldn't have said it like that. I really should have been more careful with how I came across, because really what I meant by that, I didn't mean that the glass was fragile in that it could easily be smashed. I didn't feel like anyone was about to do that. It was more just the feeling that all of this intense anger from the guy was visible. I couldn't get away from it, so it wasn't over the phone, and it wasn't like I could walk into a different room and shut the door. It was just always in my face on the other side of the glass, as were these men. And at first I did feel like, because they seemed to agree with him, because they'd never heard any other side to the story, I did feel intimidated by them, and I certainly felt their judgment. It was clear that they were judging me, but they hadn't done anything to make me actually fear for my safety. If they had, for example, when Mike had burst into the garden, he burst in, walked straight past me, and stood in the middle of it to sort of claim his territory, a bit like a dog weeing on a tree. He wasn't physically aggressive towards me. I think he was just assuming that in itself would be intimidating enough for me to give him what he wanted. If he had been, if there was any sign he was going to be physically aggressive towards me, I would have given him the money. And I just want to make that super clear, because that's all that matters, is that you're okay. And one of the reasons that I put this video out was because I wanted people to think about when it would benefit them to stand up to a narcissist and when it wouldn't. And I talk about that later. I don't necessarily expect that everyone's going to feel that the way I handled it is the way that they would want to. So this is just one way that you can choose to handle a narcissist if you want. If I had given him the money straight away, that wouldn't have meant that I was a total loser or something. It would be a perfectly rational thing to do, to think, okay, this guy's acting in a crazy way, I'm just going to give him what he wants, end the situation. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Another thing that I guess I thought I should probably respond to is that some people have been talking about the way I handled the money situation. I don't think I really appreciated how hard it is to really imagine what a different culture is like unless you've lived in it. If this had happened in England, I would have handled it very differently. I would have asked the hotel to compensate me in the same way that I did, and had they said yes, I would have asked them to put that in writing. In a country like that, it's very different. And the reason it's different is because if things didn't work out in England, I'd take them to court, to a small claims court. But in Indonesia, you wouldn't hire a solicitor over something like that. It's not worth it because there's so much corruption. So when the hotel promised to compensate me, I knew, judging by the way Mike had since behaved, that it was looking unlikely that they would do that. He wasn't behaving professionally, as I said in the previous video. So, and I wouldn't have the option I'd have in the West of then taking legal action. That was the only way I could make sure I got reimbursed. The issue with that country is that when things do go wrong, it's hard to get the right support, the right legal support and the support from the police. As you'll find out later, I would have had to have paid the police for them to have helped me. So following on from part 1, where we're up to in the story is that I am in the reception and I've got the door locked. I've taken the key out of the lock. I don't have a phone because the guy has taken my phone, Mike. He's outside talking to these men about me. Eventually, one of them came to the window and told me that he was the chief of the 3 islands. And they that's how it runs there. They have a sort of chief that runs the islands. So, and it turns out that actually he wasn't the chief. I found out the next day he was actually the assistant to the chief. But anyway, he asked me what had happened, and I explained because I know that they have the authority even over the police in that area. I said, he's got my phone, can you get my phone back from him, please? Which he did. So anyway, I told him what had happened, and he said, he listened to me and said, okay, let's go to the doctor then about your back. And I said I didn't want to leave and I wasn't going to open the door until Mike had gone. So he arranged for Mike to go, and all the guys just gradually cleared off. So when it was just me and 2 others, one of them that was going to take me to the doctor, I then opened the door. On the way to the doctor, Mike appeared again, coming towards us down a very narrow alleyway, holding his phone and saying that he'd just heard about what I'd done on the way to this island in the boat from people who'd been travelling with me. And he had this story to tell them about just how awful I was. So it was a shock to see him, because I thought now he'd gone, and here he was again, and looming above me down this narrow alleyway. My heart was racing, but I didn't really feel afraid for my safety, because I had these 2 guys with me who were taking me to the doctor. One of them stopped and spoke to him, and the other one, we carried on going. And I knew that whatever he was saying wasn't going to be true, because I hadn't spoken to anyone on the way to the island. And I had, so he was just making up another story. But this time it did bother me if this chief of the islands was going to listen to him, because I wanted this to be over. So I wanted him to understand what had actually happened. Narcissists use gossip to paint a picture of their target that will encourage contempt from the people they're trying to influence to be on their side, so that they can feel validated about themselves. If these people agree with their view of the target as being the one who has the problem, then they don't have to face their own shame. The doctor told me to get x-rays done and gave me some strong cream to put on my back and some strong medication for the pain. I told the chief of the island assistant how much it would cost to go to the hospital to get the x-ray. We talked through how much it would cost for boats and taxis and so on. And I explained how in the end, all of this was going to be more than what I owed Mike for his food in his hotel. And this guy wanted it to be over. He just said, can't you just pay him? Because he wanted the situation to end, and he figured that I'd be easier to convince than Mike. But again, I refused. I said I will pay up to nearly half. From the point of view of the chief of the island's assistant, it was a hassle because he had Mike in his ear trying to tell him to sort everything out and to make me pay up. So it made things harder for him that I wasn't prepared to do that. And that alone didn't make me feel obliged to pay. It wasn't my responsibility that Mike had decided to go and hassle all of these people about this problem. I didn't think I was going to see Mike again, so I didn't really see this as prolonging the situation. I saw it as that I was being generous to offer half of the money, because the money that he owed me was more than the full amount, and I knew that I wasn't going to get that half back again. So I was giving up half to try to end the situation. I ended up going back to the hotel after the doctor, and this time I was with just one person because the chief of the island assistant had gone. And that one person that I was with had been telling me that he agreed with me, he understood and saw and felt that what I was saying was right, you know, that my offer was right, and that yes, actually in the end he would owe me more than I would owe him anyway. But when we got to the hotel, there was Mike again. I hadn't expected to see Mike again, and if I'd known that I would, after coming back from the doctor, I would never have left the reception that I'd locked myself into. I was told that this situation was now being dealt with by the chief of the islands and his assistant. They'd also promised me that I wasn't going to see him again, that, you know, when I agreed to leave reception. Now this time I didn't have a room to go to because I had told them I was leaving. I didn't want to stay there when he knew where I was. So, and by now it was way over the checkout time. The manager still wasn't there. The young girl, the receptionist, she wasn't there either now. And there was just a very scrawny boy who looked like maybe 21 or something at the most. And so I asked him to let me into my room, and or just to let me into a room, you know, just to get away from Mike. And Mike told him, no, don't let her. And he came right up to us. And there weren't many, you know, well, I guess at this point there were, I think there were 3 other guys there and him, and then this young hotel guy. And, you know, and he stood over him and said, no, don't let her don't let her in. She is going to be arrested. And he was just, you know, sort of shouting really at this guy with me standing right there, saying that my passport was going to be taken, I was going to be taken out of the country, that I'm basically a criminal and I'm just about to be arrested early in the morning at dawn, you know. And I just remained calm. I can't remember at that point if my heart was racing or not, but I just remember that I chose to zone out. And I just sort of looked past him and just remained really calm. And then eventually I think I sat down at one point because there was nothing I could do. Now, this was my way of protecting myself. At this point, I felt really stressed because I couldn't escape. You know, there was nowhere I could go. I didn't know where the key was to that room. The girl wasn't there to let me in. I couldn't get away into my room. I couldn't get away by going to a touristy area because then he would have come after me and I might have then been alone with him, you know, in some alleyway. I wasn't alone now. There were other people around, but they were all behaving as if he was the boss. And even the guy that had been agreeing with me was now just staying absolutely silent. One of them had told me that he knew someone who had some accommodation I could go to that night. And so I said to him, can we go? And he looked away and didn't reply. And this happened a few times. And in the meantime, this guy, Mike, he tried everything. So he'd come really close to me, he'd shout at me, he'd go away again, he'd talk on his phone. He rang up these guests that had been staying at the hotel. He put the couple on speakerphone, and I didn't hear anything really apart from them going, oh, like listening to him. They were probably just trying to do something else, and he just needed to. This was triangulation, you know. I made a video about that where, and he was constantly using triangulation the whole day. He was bringing in other people and complaining about me in front of me to them. He wanted me to feel shame because he feels so much shame himself, and he was projecting that shame onto me, and he needed me to feel shame so that he didn't have to feel it for those moments while I felt it. And, you know, so he was calling all sorts of people, ranting about me. He was even calling the hotel manager of where I was. And even though that guy was saying to him to just go and not to cause a problem, you know, but then he was just sort of complaining about me just really loudly and in a really disrespectful way, full of contempt. He called up the couple I'd met because he wanted me to feel betrayed by them. That, you know, that the idea being they were my friends and now they were siding with him about me. But it didn't work because I didn't see them as my friends. They were people I'd met briefly. So I think because we were Facebook friends after I left, we were Facebook friends because she was going to send me some photos. So it didn't mean that we were actually friends. I did feel a bit embarrassed that he'd contacted them and that they were talking about me. And, you know, I guess the surprise of that he was talking to them about me. But I also saw what he was doing. I saw, oh, this is triangulation now. And I saw how desperate he was that he would even do that, and that he was expecting something was going to come from it. I just thought, the lengths this guy is going to try to shame me, that he's actually ringing up past customers to do it. I wasn't going to let him decide how I was going to behave. That was in my control. You know, and I didn't want to behave in a sort of extreme way. I didn't want to be shouting at someone. That would have felt like I was becoming someone I don't want to be. And I wasn't going to let him turn me into that person. Narcissists will blow up a small issue into a huge drama. That they do this in so many different contexts, and they will do their best to make sure that they create an impression that somebody else has made this into a drama and not them. And really that's what he was doing to me. He was suggesting to people that I was a criminal, and that's why the police were needed, and that's why he needed to warn everyone about me and call everyone about me, and everyone should know just how dreadful I was, but that I was kind of forcing this situation into existence. So you can see how narcissists have this illusionary world that they impose on other people. He wasn't satisfied with only imposing it on me. He had to impose it on all of these other people. So many people had to take time out of their day so that he could impose this illusion on them in order to get validation from them. The more they followed his instructions and listened to what he was saying about me and saw me in a sort of shameful light, the more he could feel validated and the more he could feel empowered and didn't have to face his own shame. His shame had really come to the surface because he felt slighted by the fact that I hadn't paid this bill. He took it as a personal insult. Narcissists take things very personally. It's very hard for a narcissist to really behave professionally, because when you behave professionally, you can't be thinking emotionally. You need to be thinking reasonably and logically. And narcissists can't do that. So that's why they're bullies in the workplace. And it's why they can't treat customers respectfully if they feel in any way that their power is being threatened, which can happen very easily because they have a very different perception of when someone's a threat to a rational person. At one point, when he came close to me and he was raising his voice right sort of in my face, I did turn to look at him and I said to him in a way that would have sounded quite calm, "I'm not going to talk to you because you can't behave normally." And then I sort of just drifted off again into space, and then he said something about that, you know, something like, "I'm not behaving normally," or something, tried to make me look crazy. And then I couldn't resist it. I couldn't resist actually. And I ended up saying to him that he was completely crazy. And that actually really got to him, because after that he laughed, and then I said to him, "Oh, did that hit a nerve?" And you know, and I think that did hit a nerve, and he was bothered by that, and then he went over and talked to the guys and was talking to them and laughing in a really fake way, and I could see that he felt uncomfortable, and like it was really important to him that they looked up to him, but he wasn't. They were already talking amongst themselves, and he wasn't quite fitting in at that moment. He was realising that people were losing interest in his drama and he wasn't the centre of attention anymore. They were talking about different things together and just waiting for this to end. And he was seeing that I wasn't going to give him what he wanted. Nothing was changing, that all of this effort he'd put in so far might be for nothing. There wasn't any time that I doubted myself or felt like I was behaving in a crazy way or believed anything he said. I didn't feel any shame when he was talking about me to other people, because I could see what he was doing, and I wasn't gonna take myself there. It was like I was able to make that choice to not even entertain that any of his behaviour was okay or that anything was my fault. So I kind of took the position really from the start that this was all this guy's problem. And I just let myself sort of lean back on that. I think it's something that when I was younger, I used to wonder how people could do that. And I think part of how I can do it is from experience of seeing characters like him in action and learning about them and how they, you know, and realising that a person like him, that there's a whole pattern to his behaviour, and that I'm somebody who he thinks is going to be one of his victims, and the way he behaves around me is the same way he would behave around somebody else who he would see that way. In the past, when I was younger, at the time that I described in that last video about John Warboys, I would have felt more like this was about me and there was something personal going on about me. So far, here are the boxes of a narcissist that he's ticked. He's shown contempt for women, contempt for his wife, and contempt for me. He's ignored boundaries. He's ignored my personal boundaries. He's ignored the boundaries of the hotel when he broke into my room. He's ignored he ignored my personal boundaries when he shouted on the phone at me. He's shown aggression. He's shown rage over really nothing, just him feeling criticised by something that wasn't a criticism of him personally, but of the object in his hotel. He was intimidating me in various different ways. He's shown a lack of empathy because he didn't care about how much he was intimidating me and threatening me. He's shown a need for validation, a very desperate need for validation, both from me, so that, you know, for me to react emotionally to him so he can feel powerful, and from these other people who he called up and actually invited along to the scene just so that they could validate him, because if they were behind him, he would feel more powerful. He felt very threatened by me because I wasn't giving him any validation. So he was at risk of feeling more and more shame, and he had to undo that. So all of these are narcissistic traits, and really strong ones as well, because the behaviour was getting more and more extreme. You know, calling the police was really a desperate need for validation. None of this was about money. It was only about power. The food bill wasn't large, you know, so this was not about money. Had it actually been about money, I think he probably would have weighed his options a bit more sensibly and thought, wow, I'm taking a whole day off work in order to try to get this small amount of money for a customer who could leave a really bad review about our hotel. You know, that's if he was really thinking about the hotel losing out on money, I think he would have been able to look at the bigger picture and think, well, how's this business going to lose out more by losing a bit of money, or by getting a really bad review from a very annoyed customer who is who's saying that she's in severe pain from something that I know is faulty and I've actually removed from the hotel. Everything I did was to protect myself. I didn't feel angry with him. I just felt like I was watching something play and just waiting until he ran out of steam. By this time, because one of the guys had told me that he was going to take me to the bungalows that he co-owned, you know, he was going to help me with my bags and so on, and we'd already decided with the chief of the island's assistant how this was going to be handled, I again felt like this is going to be over soon. And it was really frustrating that whenever I asked him, can we go now, he ignored what I was saying. The reason he did it was because he didn't want to annoy Mike. But that essentially trapped me in the situation. And I again didn't give him the money because I thought, well, it's going to be over soon. It can't go on forever. I stared ahead of me. I remained calm. I didn't make eye contact with him 99% of the time. Sometimes that wasn't possible because he'd really come right into my face, you know, right really close up. And so sometimes I needed to make eye contact to see what he was doing. But generally I didn't make any eye contact with him. At one point he showed me his ID card, an Indonesian ID card. He must have had residency there by then, from living there for 8 years. And he started shouting at me, I'm Indonesian, and just waving this thing at me. And his plan was to make me feel like the police would listen to him because he's Indonesian and not me. I mean, he obviously didn't look Indonesian. He had a Northern English accent and so on. But I just didn't react. I didn't look at the thing he was showing me. I just let myself stare into space and I just ignored it. I desperately wanted to get out of that situation. So although I remained calm and so on, and although I didn't show how stressed I was, I didn't feel safe. I didn't feel like I could get to a safe place. And when I say that I didn't feel safe, I don't mean I didn't feel physically safe. I mean I didn't feel emotionally safe because I was enduring this incessant abuse and it had been going on all day. And now it was dark and there was nobody there. There was no way of getting a break from it because I couldn't get into a room. So it wasn't that I felt like he was going to suddenly physically attack me or anything. In fact, I was sure that he wasn't because he was so desperate to be liked and respected by the men who were there. And I had spent some time with a couple of those men and I'd started to realise that none of them were going to become aggressive. They were all perfectly polite and respectful towards me. They weren't standing up for me. They weren't coming to my aid in any way. But they weren't doing anything abusive towards me themselves. And because that culture is not an aggressive culture, he would have looked really, really bad and lost all of their respect had he become physically aggressive. And he knew that. So I knew that he wasn't going to start attacking me. If I had felt like I was in physical danger, then I would have just given him the money because it's not worth it. If you're on your own with somebody like that, and there's no one else around and he's out of control of himself, then, and I would say, or she is out of control of herself, but I guess it's a bit different with a woman because they're not as strong, but if you feel like you're actually in physical danger, it's better to just give them their way. It's not worth it. It's never worth putting yourself in danger. I put myself through a lot emotionally by not giving him his way. And so, there's a question of, was that a good idea? Or was it worth it? It had got to the point where I'd invested too much to give up now. If I'd known the night before this happened that the next morning this crazy guy was going to turn up and sit outside my hotel room until it got dark and harass me and threaten me and try to intimidate me and take my phone and so on, I would have given him the money. I wouldn't have put myself through a whole day of that into night time out of choice, but I didn't know that it was going to go on as long as it did. It was just so crazy. When I went to the doctors, I thought that was it. I didn't think I would ever see Mike again. And then when I came back and he was there, by that point I'd invested so much into the situation that I wasn't going to back down now. If I'd given him the money, the situation would have changed. But it wasn't me who was prolonging this situation. It was him. It was his drama that he was creating and building on. At one point he told me he was going to talk about me on Facebook. He was going to post all over Facebook about me. And I guess I didn't even understand why he thought that would bother me, because we don't even know the same people, So, so I don't really understand the logic there, but it had absolutely no effect on me. I just thought, wow, you're so desperate to shame me. You're really trying to think of absolutely anything. He told me the lady wanted to speak to me, and he asked me if I wanted to speak to her. So I said that I would, and he passed the phone to me. And then, of course, as I walked away with it, he said to the men that were there that now I'd run off and stolen his phone, which is quite ironic actually, because that's what he'd actually done to me. And then on that phone call, I told her what had happened, and it was good to just speak to someone who wasn't directly involved in the situation. He didn't try to stop me from walking away, because I think he was hoping that she would persuade me, now that she'd heard all these stories from him, that, you know, she would try to persuade me to give him the money. And so I managed to get into the garden of another of these rooms and lock the door. And so I sat there, I spoke to her on the phone for a bit, and then I just sort of sat at the table there. And then a guy came along and knocked on the door, and I checked that it was only him. And when it was, I let him in and gave him the phone, which he then gave to Mike. And that was when Mike finally left. I then came out of the hotel, and I went to stay in that guy's bungalows, but I didn't feel safe there because I knew that Mike knew where I was. He had gone back to his island, so I knew he wasn't going to be coming back in the night in his boat, and that I was safe until the morning. But I wanted to be out of there first thing in the morning, so I left. I think it was something like 6:30 in the morning. I left and I went straight to get a boat out of there. If you wouldn't want to put yourself through a situation like this, and you would just want to give him the money from the beginning, from when he first was shouting down the phone, or in fact actually then I didn't know that's what he wanted, but from when he first turned up to the hotel, then that's completely understandable. It's, you know, it's down to whether you think it's worth it or not. It also depends on what your values are. For me, I don't feel that life is all about feeling comfortable. I think sometimes it's good to have uncomfortable feelings and to be challenged. So for me, I felt like this was a sort of character building challenge, and I wanted to meet it. But it also depends on your level of tolerance. So for me, an experience like that helped me to see how far I've come, I think. I think with every experience like that, I can see how much progress I'm making. And if I didn't ever put myself through something like that, then I probably wouldn't have developed the strength that I have developed from going through situations like that. If you're suffering from PTSD from abuse that you've endured in the past, then this wouldn't just be discomfort, it would be traumatic. And so you know, again, you need to sort of weigh that up. Would it be worth getting re-traumatized for? I think your tolerance level is really important when you're thinking about a situation like this. You know, if you're going to get re-traumatized and that's going to affect you for I don't know how, you know, for several weeks afterwards or something, then it's really not going to be worth it. Also, if you know the person, it can make it a lot harder. For me, I didn't know this guy, and so he didn't know what buttons to push. If you've known someone well, then they're going to know what's going to trigger you and what they could say that could really hurt you. And so it's going to be harder to stay rational and to not use emotional thinking throughout the experience. In that situation, you might decide it's better to just to do what's easiest on you, to give them what they want if it's not something that's going to be really painful or horrible for you to give them. So if it was a small amount of money, or if they just wanted you to tell them that they're right or apologise or something like that, if you knew that after that you didn't have to have contact with them again, it might be best just to give it to them than to risk getting pulled into all of these illusions and getting really upset by it and possibly traumatised by it. If it's someone you know who you're going to see regularly, giving them what they want, you know, if that's validation, telling them they're right, apologising if you didn't do anything wrong in order to make them feel better, that's not going to stop them from being abusive in the future. It might at that point, in that moment, they won't need to get narcissistic supply from being abusive. In a way, they are being abusive if they're crossing your boundaries and you're letting them. You know, if you're losing integrity for them, then that will have been abusive behaviour anyway. But it's not going to stop them from being intentionally hurtful in the future. So it's worth thinking about the best way to handle them. And if they're people who, if they're family or somebody that you're in a relationship with, the best way might just be not to have any contact with them, however painful that might be, depending on how much they hurt you. But this is something I'm going to talk about in future videos. And if it's someone at work, then sometimes by insisting on those boundaries, by using that, using the method that I used, after a while of them constantly coming up against this brick wall and not seeing any emotion, they can give up and they can pick on a different target. If the person has seen you react emotionally to them before, then you not reacting to them this time might not really make a difference. They might still keep trying and trying and trying because they've seen that in the past you've reacted emotionally. So with something like Jade, it can be better to use it with people who don't know you, who you've never reacted to emotionally, because then they'll start to see, oh, okay, it's not going to work with this person. As you can see with this guy, even though he didn't know me and I'd never reacted emotionally to him in the past, he was convinced that he could try to get that reaction out of me, otherwise he wouldn't have kept going. And that could be because in the past he's managed to elicit that reaction from other people, probably women, and you know, he was living in a culture where a woman would not react like I did usually. With a man, you know, they wouldn't hold their ground necessarily. And also he was married to somebody from Thailand, and Thai culture is very different from British culture. Women in Thailand can be subservient towards men, not always, but it's very common. I think what's really important is to make sure that you're not tied up in a situation like that because you are buying into the narcissist's illusion about your worth. If you're standing up for yourself because you're afraid that the narcissist is right about you, then that's a completely different thing. That's quite pointless, really, because you've essentially already lost. You're already on the same side as the narcissist, no matter what you do. The narcissist is never going to validate the idea that you're actually, there's nothing wrong with you and that this is all his or her problem. So that means that you're fighting a losing battle. Even if you win the win that I guess the fight of that situation. So in other words, he doesn't get the money. You're still not going to completely win because he still would have made you lose time out of your day and so on by creating this massive drama. So if your sense of self-worth depends on completely winning, then you've lost from the very beginning because you can't control someone else's behaviour. I wasn't trying to prove something to him. I was showing myself that my boundaries and my values matter. I reaffirmed the importance of my boundaries to myself, and I showed myself that I'm willing to assert them. And I validated my own feelings myself, and I showed myself that I didn't need them to be validated by somebody who disagreed and wanted me to see a whole other picture of myself. When you resist something, you make it real. So by sitting back and watching how the narcissist was trying to build and build on his illusionary world, I wasn't buying into any of it, and the drama was all of his own making. and I could see that. If I'd been actively trying to resist it all the time, if I'd been telling him he was wrong and telling everyone else he was wrong every time he was saying this stuff about me, then I would have been creating in my own mind more and more the possibility that he was right, that there was something here to resist. But as it was, this was just his own, it's sort of like he was just creating this daydream of his own and expressing it. And that wasn't anything I needed to get involved with. When it comes to a situation like this with a narcissist, belief is everything. A narcissist's power is in your belief. If you believe his version of events and in the illusions that he's putting out there, then he has the power over you. Something that people often struggle with narcissists is that their level of belief that the problem is you and not them is often very strong. And that's because they need you to believe that, because otherwise they have to face their own shame. But if your level of belief is equally strong that this is their problem, then it's impossible for them to beat you in any of this psychological warfare. I didn't come out of this situation unscathed. I felt really stressed, and I want to talk to you in the next video about how I managed that stress and how I made sure I didn't get PTSD from that situation. A lot of people get something called complex PTSD from dealing with narcissists and narcissistic abuse. In the next part of this series, I'm going to talk about how he tried to stop me from leaving the country and so created an even bigger drama. So if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.